Now, this third type of laziness is in some ways the most important one you need to bear in mind when you're using LINQ. And this is not doing things more times than you need to. In particular, it's often a bad idea to iterate through the same IEnumerable sequence more than once. Now, why is this? Well, there are two main reasons. The first is a performance reason. If your pipeline contains any methods that take quite a bit of time to run, then you don't want to call them a second time, if you could instead have used the results from calling them the first time. And the second reason is to do with correctness. In some circumstances, it's possible to get different results when you iterate through a sequence a second time. And so you can introduce hard to track down bugs into your program if you're not careful. So we're going to look at some examples to help us understand both of these issues. And we'll start off by thinking about the performance implications of multiple enumeration. For our first example, we'll return to the LINQ pipeline that we looked at earlier on in this module, which is going off to various websites and downloading web pages and RSS feeds. And we use that to discuss the importance of not evaluating the entire sequence unless we absolutely need to. But let's say we're doing something like this, where we're trying to find all the links about, let's say, Angular. And so in this case, we do want to evaluate the entire sequence. However, suppose I also want to find all the links about Azure. Now, I could change my where statement to say that where the link title includes either Angular or Azure, and that would mean we only have to loop through once, but that would also mean that the Angular and Azure links all get mixed together. And so you might decide to approach this by saying, first I'll iterate through and find all the Azure links, and then I'll iterate through a second time and find all the Angular links. But now, when we run this, you'll see that we download all 4 of the web pages to find the Azure links, but it doesn't reuse them. It actually goes off and re-downloads them all again to find the Angular links. And this is happening because of the deferred execution that LINQ provides. It doesn't do the work up front, it waits until you enumerate to actually evaluate all the stages in your pipeline. But the downside of that is that now we end up evaluating the whole pipeline twice. So how can we fix this? Well, one way might be to try to rework our LINQ expression and group the results into links about Azure and links about Angular. And we can sort of do that by putting a group by on the end of our query like this. It does now mean that we're only going through our sequence once again, but it is a bit messy and maybe not even strictly correct, as it won't cope with a link being about both Angular and Azure. And so we can run this and we can see that we've got 27 items about Angular and 67 about Azure. So how should we solve this? Well, earlier on in this module, I warned you against using methods like toList, because when you call them, the entire sequence gets immediately executed and runs all the stages in your pipeline and stores the results in memory. But in this case, that's exactly what we want. If we can store the result of executing this entire LINQ pipeline in memory, then it's going to be relatively cheap to iterate through it several times, picking out the different things we're interested in. So here's what I'd write to find all the links about Azure and Angular. I'd download once to a list and then I'd run my queries on that. And because these where clauses are operating against in-memory lists, they're super quick and they're not requiring us to re-download these web pages. So here's my advice for when to use methods like toList, toArray or toDictionary. First, only use them if you know you definitely need the entire sequence to be evaluated. But if you do know you need all the data, and for convenience you want to be able to iterate through that data several times, picking out different things each time, then it's perfectly fine to cache the result of your sequence in memory using something like toList. And obviously that does assume that your data set isn't so huge that it won't fit in memory. So we've looked at the first reason to avoid multiple enumerations, which is to do with performance. And I haven't forgotten the second reason, we're going to look at that shortly. But before we do that, let's consider the implications of multiple enumeration when we're working with a database.